Welcome to the latest episode of the Auto Futurecast with me, Chris Kirby, in association with Tomorrow's Journey and Asset Finance Connect. Today I'm joined by Dan Caesar, CEO of Fully Charged, but also a number of different companies in the brand as well, Dan. So tell us a little bit about your background and the companies and what you do.
Well, great to be here. I've been working on the Fully Charged show for the best part of a decade. That YouTube channel's been going since 2010, when actor and presenter Robert Llewellyn decided it would be good to have a YouTube channel about electric vehicles and clean energy. And I'd actually come out of the clean energy industry. I've been in it since about 2005, who's counting? And I've been driving an EV for a little while when I met Robert. And YouTube doesn't pay the bills, so we formed a great relationship. We were both passionate about electric vehicles, electric mobility of all shapes and sizes, and clean energy too. And so I came in and started to help build it out as a business. And a big part of that is our events around the world, which are called Everything Electric, and we run those in Canada, the US, Europe, Australia, and here in the UK as well. But it's predominantly business to consumer events. And then more recently, we've also started a lobbying group called Electric Vehicles UK, which is designed to help drive demand of electric vehicles in the UK by influencing politicians, the press, and purchasers as well.
So it's a super important channel as well. I think everybody involved in this space has seen a lot of bits of negative press, almost always unfounded disinformation. So plenty of stuff that needs to be covered. So I think having that kind of trade association and structure behind it, and then I guess that's bringing together a number of different organisations with the same goal to lobby government, which I think is hugely important.
It is really important. We've seen misinformation rise quite significantly in the last few years. I would say it's as bad now as it has ever been. It went a little bit quiet, but recent political events in the US, some uncertainty in the UK has meant that people we would consider bad actors, people who are kind of spreading misinformation about battery EVs in particular, they have become sort of more shrill, more hysterical as they see the beginning of the end of the combustion era. Now, I'm an petrol head myself, so I'm not saying that in any way other than new technology always comes along. Battery EV technology is very, very good, but we are in a big transitionary moment. That will continue for quite some time. There's no need to panic, but it is happening, and we see a lot of people putting their heads in the sand on that particular issue. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, it's clearly a wave that is taking, I mean, particularly in the UK, we see it every day, I guess, but also globally, the trend is happening. Feels like it's past the tipping point. But I think often I've spoken at a few events, industry-looking events, where people have talked about declining sales. Not declining sales, it's the declining growth rate. I think particularly in our industry, but I think generally we look a lot at the micro, not the macro. So I think if you were looking at, we look back in 10 years' time and you look at the EV trends, it's going to be a very steady, straight curve. But 1 month down, 1 month that slowly drops off, and everyone's sort of, it doesn't work. It's a broken product. People don't want it. All of these kind of things. And I know we were talking a bit beforehand about some of the EV myths, and obviously a lot of our listeners, viewers are industry people, and I think the sales bit is the bit that bothers them. Or is this the thing I get behind? Because should I be selling them? Should I be leasing them? Should I be renting them? And I think that's a bit that we're definitely seeing the growth of. It's just being hidden in a lot of noise and confusion, I guess, in that situation.
I mean, I actually have a huge amount of sympathy. It must be incredibly difficult to negotiate the path through. I think the thought that uptake would be linear is ideal and optimistic, and it was never really going to be quite like that, particularly when you start to scratch at the early mainstream. Maybe not the early adopters who are super passionate. They don't need much excuse to adopt new technologies, but you're going to the wider world trying to educate people. So I think that we have reached that kind of point. I do have huge sympathy with companies who are trying to navigate the best way through that. Obviously, to keep your business going, you want it to do well, be profitable, and it is quite hard to chart a path through that. But I think whenever we've been a little bit critical of car companies in the past, our view is not so much that we think they're doing the wrong thing, but we're worried for them. A critical friend to say, actually, I think the tipping point has passed. I think battery EV is going to make up the large bulk of the market, and actually, if you don't sort of plan ahead, you're not in the right position to surf the wave, then you could have a problem. So it really was a constructive, critical friend to say, actually, this technology is really, really good, but right the way through the automotive sector, whether you're in the boardroom or you're in the dealership, if you're not driving a battery EV and you don't really understand it, I can see why you might be a bit antipathetic towards that technology. But once you have driven it for a while, you actually start to go, actually, I think this might be better and ultimately cheaper technology, and then the penny starts to drop. So it's a fascinating moment, really, really difficult to work a way through. But what we're seeing all the time is the development of new chemistries, battery chemistries, cheaper, more tech, etc. And I was recently at the Shanghai Auto Show, for example, which felt like I was kind of walking into the future, and that's what's coming. That's the wave that's coming. So from our perspective, we're keen to, I guess, help people chart a course through what is a tricky period.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm the same way. I'm an ex-manufacturer person for 15 years, and I've sat on that side of the fence. And of course, if you've got a stable business, change is scary to you, right? Of course. And there's people that have taken it opportunistically. I've said before on the podcast, the talk that I had from the head of innovation of Hyundai pre-lockdown, where he said, EVs are coming, and actually we're going to use it as an opportunity to reposition our brand into the more premium space, because it's going to shake everything up and change how people think about brands. And they took it a bit as an opportunity, and they have been, I guess, a leader in that space. But I think generally, if you're in Europe, if you're a European German car manufacturer, for example, why would you want anything to change? It's been going well. So it's definitely difficult when these things are happening, both on like the new car sales, and then you have the challenges around used cars and the market for that, and on all of that. It's not just the change of getting consumers to buy it, it's the change of how do you maintain it, how long do you hold them for, what's their residual values down the line, who's going to buy the used cars, all of that stuff. It changes everything. It's not just, it's a different propulsion system in a vehicle.
I mean, it's a true paradigm shift, so everything is being impacted, which makes it, as you say, increases anxiety if you're used to a stable business model. We've just filmed in Utrecht in the Netherlands, where they've just turned on, I think, about 500 Renault 5s V2G.
Right, yeah.
And actually making money from those assets. That is something that's going to happen, and obviously that's completely different to where we've been with conventional automotive to this date. So, but I just think in life, putting your head in the sand and pretending this stuff isn't happening is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
And some companies have been really, really smart in the way they've kind of had like a two-leg strategy. Maybe they've gone a bit more for plug-in hybrids plus battery electric vehicles. They're trying to work their way through this, still to absorb market demand while it's there, but also to gear up and be ready with battery EV too. So I as I say, working for a car company it is a really, really difficult thing. Have my respect. I couldn't do it. It's a tough job. Yeah,
absolutely. I think also one of the things particularly prevalent in the market at the moment is introduction of lower priced EVs. Actually saw even a thing last night. I got back late flight from Frankfurt and sitting a bit zombie in bed going, scrolling LinkedIn, but seeing about like the new Leap motor. Basically everyone's claiming that they've seen the cheapest EV in the market, and there seems to be another one coming. But that was always my criticism a little bit. And I also have sympathy for the manufacturers, but everyone went, well, I have this battery, let's put it in the most expensive car I can because I'll get the biggest return. The battery's the expensive part. But at some point it has to sort of trickle its way down. And I guess we're at that point now with BYD product, Leap Motor, a few others is coming.
As a decision through an economic lens, it makes complete sense to say, actually, we don't quite know how this is going to work out. So let's start with our more premium product. Let's start with a smaller niche of our kind of audience. But the reality is that there's always going to be a vacuum then for cheaper, more affordable cars. And obviously cars have got more expensive over time through a range of factors completely beyond the automotive industry's control, to be completely honest. But if you have that vacuum, others are going to try to fill it. And so there's lots of talk about Chinese brands doing that at the moment, but there are some very compelling, more affordable EVs now coming from other quarters because I think of that competition. So of course, the effect on the cost of new EVs, used EVs is kind of quite well documented. It's pretty volatile. I guess as a channel and a series of events that talks a lot to the consumer, we do look at it from the point of view, well, it would be good if it's easier to access an EV for the consumer. And so we do look at it with sympathy, but at the same time we're saying, well, consumers might be able to access this technology. And until now, they've kind of been on the outside looking in. So you can see with new EV sales are going well, but actually the used EV market is really starting to pick up pace too. So I think economics is like gravity. You can't really get around it. So I think where we are now is kind of inevitable, but there will be cheaper and cheaper EVs that come as battery technology gets cheaper too. LFP is now the predominant battery chemistry, and that is cheaper than lithium ion. Sodium ion is coming down the pipe. That's cheaper still. So you're going to see, some really fierce competition for several years ahead, I think.
I think that's also a bit, the competition bit fascinates me of how that's going to work, because essentially, but again, having in my manufacturer days, everybody was pushing for increased market share. Well, the market is just the market, and it's not likely to grow or shrink massively. If we just look at UK or Europe, same number of cars are going to be sold broadly. So if everyone wants to increase their market share, and then you're trying to shove another 10 manufacturers into that space or more in some cases, things can only go one way. Either people are going to have to step back on the amount of cars they make, which I think in some cases they have, but otherwise it's just going to push prices and push margin, which I think ultimately is, I guess, good for the consumer, but slightly nerve-wracking for both manufacturers and leasecos, and because it impacts residual values and all that stuff.
Well, we've seen lots of economic bubbles before. I think that battery EV growth will continue. Maybe the growth rate will slow slightly, but it will continue. If you look at the macro, that's what's happening. But in the UK, for example, where there was sort of 40 brands competing for market share in 2019, there's now closer to 70.
Yeah.
And that's not sustainable, I don't think, in the long term. It may be that we end up with 55, but the reality is, as we've described it, it's a consequential game of musical chairs. Not everyone is going to be left with a chair once the music stops. And we've also seen a lot of conquesting. So lots of new brands are coming in, and they're actually, there's been, you mentioned Hyundai, for example. Kia have also moved from follower to leader, if I can put it that way, and they will have taken some market share from the great German brands, for example. And there is a time that will crystallize again, and people say, well, I'm into Hyundais now, I'm into Kias. So the next 5 to 10 years feels extremely significant. And it sometimes sounds hyperbolic when you say, actually, I think some car companies, some brands might not make it. But it's hard to draw any other conclusion. And we don't wish that any of them fall by the wayside. But at the moment, you're looking at it going, well, I'm not sure all those Chinese brands are going to make it. But I think that's been their strategy, Chris. Because actually, we were at the Shanghai Motor Show. There were more brands than I'd even heard of. And we're pretty well connected with the market. And the brands often, they belong to, there's not 400 companies. There's actually dozens of companies. But there's lots of different brands. And what we felt very, very strongly was a collective will to succeed. And the fact that if one brand doesn't succeed, then the people who've been working on how to manufacture cars, how to market the cars, etc., will just be absorbed by the companies that are succeeding in China. So it felt extraordinary to watch it. There was a kind of a collaborative feeling within the exhibition halls there that actually, ultimately, it may be that there's only 12 super brands that come out of the Chinese market, but that, of course, is going to be, they're going to be, Darwinian process, and that they're going to be, fitter and fitter. But I have to say, on a positive note, I'm seeing some amazing product, some amazing response from more conventional car companies. Renault is just one example. What they're doing at the moment is really exciting to see.
Yeah, absolutely. We mentioned Hyundai and Kia. I had a Ioniq 5 for a short period. Fantastic car. One I highly recommend to people. Well built and all of those things. So huge amount of really interesting product. I definitely think the consolidation. I mean, thinking today or also with the. I'm really interested to get your take actually on the brand thing, and there was some stuff that's happened to me in the last couple of days that has crystallised this point for me. But I guess in the industry we've always had brands under sub-brands, VW Group, Stellantis now has grown with the number of brands underneath, and I guess the Chinese brands are somewhat similar, and as you say, could roll up. So where we might have 50, 60, 70 brands in the UK competing. If you looked at what the parent companies are, there's less. So the question will be whether there's any kind of big casualties in that, or whether there's just a continual kind of gathering of those. But what I thought was interesting that I hadn't fully realised is about the Chinese brand's rollout strategy across Europe. So I was recently in Spain, and I hired a car, and it was a JQ. Wasn't electric, but it was I really liked it. I'd had 2 weeks with it. It was a really nice hire car. Yesterday I was in Germany and talking to some dealer folks there. One of the guys drives a Tesla, and he was telling me about a brand that I hadn't heard of, and he said, they're massive here. I was like, okay, right, fine. Both talking about BYD, because that's a common brand there. But then I asked them about JQ, and they hadn't heard of that brand. So there was this thing where they were saying, but BYD are here, but only electric. But in the UK, they've got more product. They've got some hybrid product. JQ were in Spain and also in the UK and seem to be doing well, but aren't in Germany. So there seems to be also this like brand by market approach. And I don't know if when you're talking to consumers, you kind of see, particularly when you're looking in different countries, if different brands are more interesting in certain countries to others, and will that be the way these brands do it? They'll say, we'll have this brand in this country and this brand in this country, but they'll be built in the same factory.
Well, I think if you go back to China and you think about their sort of long-term patient strategy, they have a huge domestic market, as we all know. But fundamentally, they are building more manufacturing capacity, and that has to go somewhere because it's extremely competitive in China, even though the market is very, very sizable indeed. So what a lot of them have done is they've looked around the globe, and the UK is actually a fairly attractive market, but it is right-hand drive at the end of the day. We do a lot of work in Australia. We've seen quite a lot of the Chinese brands go there first as a sort of a sort of testing ground. So that's a super competitive market. But each brand has a different approach. So I know, for example, BYD are doing very, very well in Brazil. Right. There's pretty much no country that's not touched by this, and I think they're all making their sort of separate decisions, because fundamentally, if you look at China as a whole, it has this capacity, and it has to be able to put it somewhere. So that is where their scale up, the leveraging the scale up is really quite, I think, sort of awe-inspiring or scary for traditional manufacturers, because they're building the boats, they're getting more scale out of the batteries, they're obviously they've got the proximity to the supply chain. And what's interesting, I think, is also hybrids are doing quite well at the moment, particularly plug-in hybrids. I think it is valid for a consumer to think, I'm not quite ready. I mean, I drive an EV, and I would say just go straight to battery EV, but I understand that kind of impulse to maybe have a safety net purchase and go for a plug-in hybrid first. But it is interesting because we know from seeing, certainly in China, that actually the cost of the PHEV battery pack for 20 kilowatt hours versus the BEV battery 60 kilowatt hours is actually similar.
Right. Okay.
So actually the Chinese are making more profit out of the battery EV. So while they're happy to absorb PHEV demand for the moment, where they're actually going to leverage their true strength is on the pure battery electric vehicles. So when it comes to the brands, as you say, JQ and Omoda, you see them in the UK now. People are becoming slightly more familiar with them, and we've seen lots of different strategies. So Neo, we think, are going to come to the UK, but actually they've been really sort of trying the Scandinavian market to begin with, because they were seeing the level of interest in EVs in Norway, for example, in Sweden, in Denmark. So it is a bit of a patchwork. It's actually very, very hard to keep up to date with what's going on.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we've seen that a lot. We have a number of large customers in the Middle East, so I've spent a lot of time there over the last 2 years, and that's been also another, I guess, a little bit like Australia in that it's an easy market to enter for a car manufacturer. So just every time I'm there, I'm going, what's one of those? Well, I don't recognise that logo, and you kind of look it up, and it's another Chinese brand dropping in. It's quite easy for those guys to retail, but the common big players are doing. BYD is big there, and JQ as well. So the bigger brands are, I guess, getting that wider spread, and then the smaller ones, I guess, are picking more strategically markets to enter. So definitely interesting to see. And if we're thinking a bit about the kind of cross market, so again, you guys are slightly different to who we normally have. People coming from, working in the auto industry. You do work in the auto industry, but your main job is communicating with B2C customers. So interested to see how you're seeing that in the UK. What are the things that customers are saying, and then also how does that vary across other markets, really?
So we do a lot of our work in the UK. We've done quite a lot in Canada as well, quite a lot in the US, although that's kind of on pause for the moment. And we do quite a lot of work in Australia as well. We've done some stuff in Europe too. I think there is some commonality what's going on in Australia and Canada and the UK where we do our most work at the moment. But obviously I feel for North Americans because they're frustratedly looking at all the choice that's coming to UK, Europe and other parts of the world, and they can't really engage with it or get excited about it. So yeah, we tend to draw a lot of parallels really between what's going on in the UK and Australia, and looking at how consumers are connecting with EVs in those two different marketplaces. Yeah. At the moment, about 1 in 5 new car sales in the UK is pure electric. It's about 1 in 10 in Australia. So they are playing catch up. There is an openness, I think, in Australia to the Asian brands. We see a similar level of openness here in the UK, or it's not quite as clear. And there is a lot of brand building work that's having to go on, not just selling the cars, but actually building the brand. And you can see BYD sponsored Euro 2024 last year to elevate their kind of brand. So it is interesting. What we are typically finding, though, is that the EV buyers reside in a different place to classic conventional combustion engine car buyers. And what we're seeing is companies start to really realize that actually we cannot afford to see the consumer as one single monolithic block anymore. That's not the case. There will be some people who will be good to go now. There will be some people who will be open-minded and might buy a battery EV in the next 18 to 24 months. And there will be others who will frankly be saying, I'm never ever going to make that move.
I'll just keep buying a used ICE forever. And
So digital marketing now, digital targeting is really important to find the right people. So often, and I'm going to generalize here, but often it might be someone who's on LinkedIn that's buying a battery EV. Maybe it's because of salary sacrifice. Maybe they're professional, but they've got a bit more money than someone who's on Facebook. You get the point. Maybe it's someone in a Lib Dem voting area rather than someone in a Reform stronghold. Maybe it's someone who's not watching BBC and ITV anymore, but is watching YouTube or Netflix. So we're tending to find the more progressive buyers, the ones who are prepared to take the leap, going looking at media in a totally different way. The way YouTube has suddenly become a big player in terms of lots of different YouTube channels, of course, lots of great channels, but a big player in terms of car buying decision making is the test drive before the test drive. And what we've tried to do with our Everything Electric events is actually then have the physical test drive so people can come and look at multiple different cars, multiple different brands in a single setting. And once you can get people into the car, it's not an open and shut case, but you're getting there. That has a huge impact. Even if they don't buy the car there and then, they're well on the way to that decision-making process. And typically when they do get an EV, they kind of say, well, actually, they're pretty good. What was all the fuss about? What was all the negative noise about in the first place? So we're seeing some consistent stuff. Australia is a slightly newer market. They actually had no real sort of fuel standards. I think they were up there with Russia in terms of the quality of their fuel standards. So that's changing from July the 1st this year. But the Australian market it's super heated. There's so much competition down there, and we're looking to see how it plays out. But how do you get the attention of the right consumers, and how do you educate them actually? And test drives play a big part in that.
It's really interesting. So the buying journey, because it used to be relatively structured and linear for buying a nice car. Everyone would sort of buy in a relatively similar way. You would go, oh, my car is getting old, or I'm getting to the end of my finance agreement, I'm now going to go through a new cycle. And it's a slightly different process. I definitely think the information that's available online, not from the brands, is a key one. So the YouTube type channels, independent sources like your own, but also people who are reviewing them. As someone who knows a reasonable amount about EVs, looking for a new car for my wife recently, I pointed her to YouTube for about 3 hours where she went, I said, look, these are the 3 or 4 you should look at. And she watched 3 or 4 YouTube channels before we then went and looked at, before we went to see 2 in the showroom. And it does seem to be a good way of being able to narrow that down.
I mean, dealerships get a really bad rap because there's some great dealers out there, some great dealerships. We know, for example, Kia are really hot on training people up so they've got EV knowledge so that they can talk to their customer. But obviously, again, dealerships have sort of stable revenue streams, and if they've not really driven EV, that you could understand why they're skeptical. So better sales of used EVs might help them get some confidence because they might just be believing what they're reading in the press, which is no one wants EVs, which is clearly, when you look at the trend lines across the world, it's clearly nonsense.
Yeah.
So it is fascinating. But yeah, what we've tried to do with YouTube, and there are some brilliant channels out there doing it, I think, is try and be as neutral as you can be about the cars, but give people all the information they require, not least about range, real world range, as opposed to WLTP range and things like that. So for us, that's really, really important. But what's fascinating is when you come to live events like ours or others that are pure electric live events, you tend to be surrounded by drivers who've gone through the experience. They're quite good to talk to because they've been through it. Or the car companies tend to bring their EV gurus to those shows, which is great, and it's actually a really nice atmosphere to come in. You're not being pressurized, we've all been to dealerships. Some are better than others. We know that. Yeah. Some you feel a bit pressurized. Some they don't even come and talk to you. They've got a reverse psychology thing going on, I swear, in some dealerships. But the reality is that is creating an environment, educating people, dealers, buyers, etc., is going to be a big part of it. So it's going to take time. It is going to. I understand some skepticism, but it's really what's going on in the media and the press is not that helpful, because actually it's wide of the mark. Because people are discovering when they get an EV, they're going, what was all that rubbish I was subjected to before I made the decision?
And I think that's why the peer-to-peer stuff's so important, because again, I'm EV driver for 3 or more years now, and people will ask me about it, and it's like I'm not an EV evangelist, but people just ask me. They go, "How'd you get on with it?" "Oh, that was great. Brilliant, best car I've driven." "Okay, great. What about charging?" "Charging's absolutely fine." "Oh, right, okay." And it's the thing, you wouldn't believe a dealer or you wouldn't believe a car manufacturer person, but you just go, "Oh, well, you've had a couple of EVs. How'd you get on with it?" "Yeah, it's totally fine. Just charge at home. Pretty much never public charge, and when I do, I can get 50% charge in the time it takes me to have a wee and get a sandwich." "Oh, really? Oh, right, okay, I'll probably look at it then." It's that thing of the trusted peer-to-peer stuff is so important.
Yeah, it's very powerful. We're trying to unleash the voice of the owner as well, to make them share their experiences. But you would have preconceptions. If you've not had one, you would go, well, how does this work? And it's quite often analogous in most people's minds when they've not had one with a phone, right? Plug my phone in every night, therefore I'm going to plug my car in every night. And it just isn't that way. I do extremely high mileage in an EV, and I'm very fortunate to have a driveway. I appreciate that is a concern for some, but I'm fortunate enough to only need to charge my car once or twice a week, and maybe I use the public network once a month, and I'm doing like 25,000-30,000 miles a year. So, but people in their mind think, I'm going to have to charge every night, or it's going to be
I'm going to have to stop everywhere.
And I think probably on the subject of charging, no one, I think, has come to your podcast to listen to that at length, but on the subject of charging, I think its perception versus reality is completely distorted. Of course, there are imperfect situations, but I rocked up at the BP garage the other day and it was all coned off because the truck's there and I had to go and find someone. It happens, right? But I think it's still in that territory of man bites dog. It's a story because it's unusual, but actually when you get an EV, it's very low fuss.
Yeah, and I definitely think those things that you learn from, obviously we always worked in the industry. When I got my first EV, the first 2 months of having it, I figured a load of stuff out. I figured out what kilowatt hours were, how that translates to charging speed, how that translates to range, all of that kind of stuff. Because it's just a load of things that, again, it's that peer-to-peer that situation. I had a situation with my business partner, who is a software engineer, but also an electrical engineer by his first degree, so kind of really understands this stuff. He's got a first EV, first public charge after 6 months, by the way, so he does no mileage. And he was like, I went to a 350 kilowatt charger, and it was only doing 150. And I was like, that's brilliant, mate. And he went, what do you mean that's brilliant? It's not doing 350. It's like, okay, right, so this is, that's the max. You rarely get the max. And we had to go through this whole thing. And he was like, oh, right, that makes sense. But it's the kind of thing you don't know. And I do think the way things are labelled, I was actually going to ask you about WLTP in a second as well. I think sometimes they can be damaging to the cause. You get a 350 kilowatt charger and you plug into it and you don't get 350. That might be a thing that you think that's bad. Whereas actually, if I can charge at 100 on a 350, I'm going, this is great because I can get 50% charge really quickly. So I think sometimes our labels can be misleading in a way that damages trust.
I mean, I think we're very quick to label things without giving it the forethought. So on the Fully Charged show, for example, we've used a real world range from a website called EV Database. So if you're going to buy an EV, I would say that's a good place to start because they've got the stated range and then they've got the real world range. The real world range is a pretty good. Doesn't drop off a cliff when it's super cold. You know, there is some, cost to efficiency in extreme temperatures, as there is with combustion engine vehicles.
Yep.
But, the way we label the charging, all that sort of thing, I think that it's just a new industry, isn't it? It's figuring out the best way to communicate those things. But yeah, you're quite right. I think there was a YouTuber recently who did an episode that showed, he took a car to a charger and it was already charged to 80%, and it charges very slowly from 80% upwards, and he made it sound like a bad thing.
Yeah.
But the reality is that, it's like filling a cup. You fill it really quickly up to 80%, then you might slow down to do the last bit, and that's analogous with with charging a battery. And you don't normally go and use a rapid charger when you've got 80%.
Yeah, exactly.
So it is tricky. Even things like zero emission vehicles, I'm not a big fan of that phrase, to be honest, but that, policy makers have to label things, and if they're not driving EV, then maybe they're not thinking through the consequences. There was a great Transport for London study recently that showed that actually we all know that zero emissions actually means zero exhaust emissions.
Yes. Yeah.
But maybe we should have been clearer about that. I'm being generous there. Maybe we as an industry should have been clearer about that, because then if you were saying, well, what about tire particulates? What about brake dust? You could say, these are it's deceitful to call them zero emission vehicles. As it turns out, Transport for London study showed that brake dust is 83% less in a battery EV because you're doing a lot of one pedal driving on regenerative braking, and actually the tire particulates are potentially up to 20% more, but actually only 2 to 5% is actually goes into the air. Is airborne. So actually it's quite a small issue. So all of these things, how we term the batteries. Equally, batteries normally have a bit more than their stated range. So I think the industry is just trying to work out the best way to label these things up. It is complex. I'm a big fan of clarity and simplicity. Our whole campaign that we're working with Electric Vehicles UK is cheaper and better. Not just cheaper and better, because cheaper it might infer inferior, and better, not just better, because better might infer more expensive, cheaper and better, and providing proof points to show people that actually if you get a used EV, as per our cost of driving electric report, it should be on average £2,781 cheaper than a conventional used combustion vehicle, for example. So I think the industry's working through all that language, all that messaging, and yes, I think it can be really, really confusing.
And somewhat can be damaging to an extent, but at the very least, to the naysayers or to the people who want to, it gives them a bit of ammunition to create a negative story. It's easy to say, oh well, electric cars don't do the range they state, because no one's ever got the WLTP range on an electric car ever, but it's a consistent measure, so you can compare two numbers with each other and see that one will go further than the other, but it's not the real world, and it's a hole that people can poke in. Same thing with charging speed and all those other things. It doesn't actually materially affect whether they're good or not, but it creates some confusion and noise, which is tricky.
I think the industry, I probably came across in my early years of driving EV, working on a fully charged show as an evangelist. I was very excited. I think probably by the technology, I thought actually it's really good. Probably occasionally a bit frustrated that people didn't get it immediately. But the reality is I've been on a journey as well, and actually being an evangelist, is not the approach that's going to win a few hearts, but you need to win minds and wallets, and you need to make people realize that actually this is really good technology. So you need to provide proof, you need to be realistic, and yes, you don't want to shoot yourself in the foot by being too positive. EV range is great, it's really, really developed, but I think in the early years EV's range wasn't so good, so the exaggeration might have helped the industry. Now actually it's commonplace to get cars that can do 200, 300 miles, and that is only going to develop further in the next few years as well.
Absolutely. No, I think it's definitely a fascinating space to watch, and I think that the role that you guys play is really, really important in the market. Dan, thanks so much. We could talk about EVs for hours, and there's loads of other stuff I wanted to cover. Maybe we'll get you back on in a year's time or something, and we'll see what the progress is like. So thanks for joining us today. Really, really appreciate it. Thanks everybody for listening. Check out the other episodes across our YouTube channel, Spotify, Amazon, and Apple Podcasts as well. And thanks very much for listening.